It is Thursday, March 27th, 2025. I'm Grantham Taylor Hughes for my show, The Grantham Taylor Hughes Show, with my co-host, Lena Suzanne. Hi, Lena, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Grantham. How are you?
Pretty good. I messed up the intro. I forgot to say Dr. Grantham Taylor Hughes, but that's okay. Now I can emphasize it because I do have a PhD. I actually have three. At the same time, today we're going to talk about individuality, being an individual, which is really difficult in our society today. To be truly, people talk about it, they're aware of individuality, but in terms of practice, it's rather difficult. It's mostly we're in like a collective consciousness where we see things in the exoteric world and we all agree that it's a certain way. And it's hard to maintain an individual viewpoint if you disagree. Like if you disagree in the face of some type of traditional thought, that can be a real problem. And so, therefore, to maintain your individuality, there's not much of a forum for that anywhere. And that becomes people are thinking individually all the time, uniquely. In other words, you're completely and totally different than I am. So what do we do with each other? Well, we accommodate our consciousness. We accommodate our individuality. However, most of the time, we were saying earlier on pre-talk about it's mostly critical, negative criticism. Negative criticism is fluxiness and hillification. If anybody in America saw the Geico commercials, that's a term for declaring something worthless. And and therefore people are usually critically negative in our world today, and they don't really stand fast for somebody's opinion if it doesn't apply to their beliefs and their uh, storied traditions. You see, so that becomes a real problem. I'm sure you've experienced that in your life, right?
Yeah, negative criticism.
Or individuality being a problem, like expressing yourself in a group and you feel very uncomfortable because nobody's really supporting you. Correct?
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for those one word answers. It's really helpful.
You want me to think of a scenario where that happened? Um,
Well, oh, I see. You're thinking of a scenario. Do you say scenario or scenario?
Scenario.
Scenario, right?
Yeah.
Well, it happens a lot where people they're nervous, as we say, public speaking is the man's biggest fear, at least on the earth. And they're afraid to public speak because of error producing and being condemned. See, so that becomes a problem and embarrassment. Their self-consciousness in doing public speaking. And remember, I said it many years ago, I had done some um, videos that I was talking about. I thought if I would get out and talk about public speaking, because I had so much difficulty in the past, and even now, you can see I'm somewhat hesitant because remember, logic is not our native language. So we stumble around with that already. And I've given thousands and thousands of talks, and yet logic really isn't the primary language. Our native language is the Asacer we were talking about, a sacred language. And we call it sacred because it's really your native language. It's not anything esoteric. It's just a declaration by my Lama teachers in the past. We're talking about that particular language, a native language. And so the native language is your individual language, whereas your auxiliary country logic, you stumble around with it because you're trying to find words that make sense and people can understand it. You want to wax proper conclusions, which I do all the time. So you people cannot be critical because I make proper conclusions. So we can stop all that, stop the criticism, and I know you won't because that's just what we do.
So, Grantham, you are talking about individuality and situations where you speak up in a group situation and you're not supported by the other people. So yeah, I've thought of that and I have experienced that talking about lifestyle and talking about beliefs. with people who maybe don't share those same, um, you know,
Right,
beliefs and lifestyle.
right.
Yeah.
Well, because we're not taught how, like we're always talking about commendation versus condemnation. See, we're not taught to be uh, allowing people's viewpoints of having value for them. See, so people are very nervous about words because they are defining imagery. See, if we're defining different imagery for somebody, you're changing concepts. And so that makes people nervous because they can't allow somebody's individuality because they're, what do you call it when you're sort of being like the other person. So you're not separating yourself completely. It's part of the collective consciousness, I'll say. Like a new age term, they will use a new age, will use that. So if you're not part of the collective or the collective thought, then you're going against the grain. You see, so when you go against the grain, there's not really a forum for allowing that. That's why we're trying to set up, and we've been talking about the knowingness arena that we're trying to set up here, where people can come to the Pastor Newhouse's Naked Public Square, the real one, and be comfortable. Like some of my friends call it a safe place. When we're talking about things, they feel comfortable about saying things because they know they're not going to be condemned. See, if you know you're going to be condemned, and that's usually what happens, you're not going to bother with too much of it. You're not going to do a dissertation or go on a long-winded commentary because you'll get attacked because you get attacked for talking too much. You see what I mean? If you don't say wax amenities or hi, how's the weather, and you got about a 3 second window before somebody walks away, see that becomes difficult because if you start talking several sentences, then they're thinking, well, I don't know this person. But like I've said to you, if you're really learning how to outflow with things and not be apprehensive in life, you'll find you'll meet a lot of people that will engage you in conversation and spend time with you. Especially if you go to the Far East. If you go to India, you have people stop the universe there all the time. I'll speak to Indians in America, not American Indians, but East Indians, who will spend a lot of time with me because they're part of that ancient culture where well time, they're kind of masters of time. They're not concerned about going somewhere else because they know the present is the value. Like we're in a valuable situation right now because we're in the present, and this present is the universe. We were saying yesterday about, or the other day on Tuesday, we were talking about the factor of our viewpoint is. Uh, our one viewpoint is our own, being individuals, right? Our individual consciousness being born into this world in a grand compromise that we did as the essence of what we are. So we're here as a viewpoint. So that's the birthright. You have a right to be here with the birthright, and we've talked about the birthright because you made this big compromise to come here. And that's a wonderful thing. So when people are here, they're entitled to be heard and they're entitled to their individuality, but we don't really have a forum for that. That's why we talk about the golden age coming up eventually, and that is going to be something where the individuality will be respected. Right now, it's not being respected enough, where we'll be masters of time in the West, but they're doing this in the East.
Why are things different in the East?
Because ancient culture, it's thousands of years old. So they know what humanity is. It's like they use their eyes and they appreciate humanity. They know that where they are is in the eternal present type thing, or Eckhart Tolle's the eternal now factor, because we're in the now and they appreciate that because they've been there a longer time. They have an old entity, whereas in the West, even Great Britain is not doesn't go back to millions of years. There it goes thousands, but in America, it's only a couple hundred years old as the entity, so it's very immature over here. And that means there are a bunch of children that don't really appreciate or respect individuality. It's nobody's fault in the country, but it's still a factor of a culture needs to mature. So I'm thinking maybe another 300 years and there'll be some maturity. Or when the golden age comes up in a few years, then that's going to be something that'll make a big shift in people because we'll get into knowing this arena. Yeah, go ahead there,
So
please.
in the East, you're saying it's got something to do with them living more in the present moment that allows them to be tolerant of each individual being, as in you
Correct.
know.
That's correct.
Mm,
Because they've been here a longer time. The consciousness, maybe the people themselves haven't been here, but the culture's been there a long time, so they understand humanity better. When I was there, it was really a much better experience than in the West. Sure, they have difficulties there too, but generally speaking, because first off, they use their eyes. When you get off the plane, everybody's looking at you. So they don't look away. They don't shy away. They don't have that issue like they have in the West. Remember eye contact? We've talked about eye contact, where so right out of the gate they have proper eye contact because they use their eyes. Because what are your eyes for? For seeing, for looking anywhere you want to look, really. So that's not an issue with them in the Far East, or at least in India. In China, maybe not so much because they're getting westernized there and they're helter skelter. They're all over the place. It's entirely different culture in the Far East, in China, and in those countries. But it's a different thing. India is a hotbed for ancient times, and the higher Sanskrit, the Sanskrit writings are the beginning writings. When the voice that they use a tuning fork that they used to put on the spine, and they go with a tuning fork, and they have the 52 chakras in the body, and you'll notice that there's 52 letters in Sanskrit, but there's only 26 in the Arabic that we use, the Arabic language. They cut it in half to simplify the language. They cut it exactly in half to 26 letters. That's why it is 26 letters and not 52 letters of the spinal vibrations that turn into the sounds that we make with our voice. And then we codify those sounds onto paper. We write them down into our writings, our written documents, and then we learn to read them. Remember, we talked about the sentient being having the 10 senses and not just five senses. A
mm.
human being has 10 senses that makes them sentient, different than the animals. The animals have the five senses, but we have 10 senses. That's not taught in schools. We need to talk about people talk about sentience, but they don't know what sentience is. I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
Can we just go back a bit then to you were saying 52 characters in the Sanskrit, did you
Yes,
say?
52 letters because there's 52 spinal chakras in the body, and they all have a certain vibration that they would hit a tuning fork and put it on the spine. And then if you spoke, it would vibrate that particular chakra, and then they created a letter from that sound. See, it would be a sound letter of a certain tone scale, and then they created letters back in ancient times.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so in the East, where they're still using Sanskrit as opposed to the Arabic alphabet,
Well,
that
see, the Sanskrit was a sound language. Arabic was an intelligent language because now they saw the logos, the letter logos, and then they actually made an intelligent decision. It was an understanding versus a sound issue. It's like Asacer is a sound language. Just our voices are making a sound, and it's not for understanding. See, what they did in Arabic was now the intelligentsia split the 52 letters by looking at the logos and separating the two. So that was an understanding under the Asaker. But it's really a synthesis practice. Like a golden age is a synthesis time, but anything we talk about, we could call it a pre-golden age discussion. And then we're going to do some guesswork there because when we get to it, it's going to be totally different in practice versus the explanation of it. You see how that is? When you're in synthesis, you're doing it and it just works on its own. But we haven't done this in a long time. But the proof is when you speak to infants, they'll reply to you, they'll respond to you in kind when you're doing the gobbledygook or the gibberish. It's called gibberish or speaking in voices and what have you, because you're not really understanding it. But babies will respond to that. And we prove this over and over again in the marketplace with babies and talking to them that they will actually reply and look very mature when they do it. And it just blows the parents' minds when they see, what are you doing? And well, we're speaking their native language. I remember I told you that some parents went away after a couple of weeks and came back to me and said, I've been speaking as sacred to my child, and we have a much better relationship. They seem to be happier. You see, so it really works. But again, to apply it at large, it's not going to happen. We have to do an era shift to do that. That's why the golden age is coming up. Part of it's in the language. And other part is a silly cell phone is going to cause it too. But the attention, it's actually the bindu is the cell phone. In Arthur Clarke's 2010 A Space Odyssey, they showed all these dark monoliths, these rectangular monoliths going into Jupiter and exploding it. But they didn't really explain the size of it. But if you look at those monoliths, they look like a bunch of cell phones to me. Well, okay, I have a cell phone here. I'll show it, right? So we look at this and it looks like the rectangle in 2010 A Space Odyssey, Arthur Clarke's 2010. There's a film. I highly recommend doing that. So it looks like a black rectangle, right? Because it is a black rectangle, but it's actually a cell phone. But we can't tell if that's a cylinder or not because we don't turn it this way and see that it's not. But we can't tell from this angle. If I get this, there we go. From this angle, we can't see that it's not a cylinder. Okay, it could be a cylinder, correct? You agree with that?
Could be.
Okay, and that means if it's a cylinder and if I turn it on its end, it's going to have a circular end on both sides, right?
Mhm.
If it's a cylinder. Okay, so if it's a cylinder, that means it has two circular ends to it, correct?
Mhm.
This is called a Socratic argument, by the way, because Socrates would say things and say it to the audience or who he was teaching. Do you agree with that? And they'd say, yes, we agree with that. Now it becomes relative, see, relativity factor of manifestation. Anyway, so these circles on the end of a cylinder and then the middle part is the black rectangle. The black rectangle would be a threshold. The distance between the two cylinders would be a threshold between the circles. Because a threshold is like a doorway. When you step through a doorway, there's a distance, a slight uh, a threshold at the bottom. Maybe not as wide as this, but if you put this on the floor, it'd probably be the same distance as a threshold. Okay, now that threshold means what? What does a threshold mean? What's the distance between two parties? So remember, we talked about sight recognition and seeing each other as two different people, but there's a distance between us right here, which would be a threshold, right? The
Mhm.
threshold between two circles is a distance between two parties or two circles. So are you getting that so far? Do you have any questions?
No, I'm following. Carry on.
All right, so that threshold means that if there's no threshold, and I would call it threshold of fear mainly, the fear of two essences merging, and people are concerned about that. But then my Tibetan teachers taught me that there's really no two, the twain cannot meet. Individuals can't merge onto each other because they have a law of facsimiles. Law of facsimiles means it's like a fax, it's a copy, but the two can never merge. The two consciousness will never merge into one. And so this idea, the New Agers think that everything turns into well, one God when people pass. It's not true. You have your individuality throughout eternity. That would be kind of edgy. But I'm thinking because I believe in reincarnation and it's hard for me not to because I've traveled all around the world and the majority of people believe in that. So I'm with the majority with that. But it's really nothing spooky about it at all. It's just, I mean, to me, it's just the facts and the matter. All right, so now back to the cell phone concept, why it's going to help cause the golden age, because we've got each person, and we were saying in the Far East, they say that the power of the individual is about 10,000 suns of power. So by this 10,000 suns of power being put on the cell phone, which really, when I said you get rid of that threshold of fear, when there's no fear, the two circles come together in a facsimile. There's a small exiguous degree between the two. That means when that threshold of fear is gone, when you turn it sideways, now you're looking at a circle. So this threshold is eliminated. When it's a threshold of fear is eliminated. Darkness is a fear factor. So when we eliminate that triangle of fear, I mean rectangle of fear, not triangle, but a rectangle of fear, then now when you turn the circle sideways, what do you have? Well, you have the bindu. See, so what are people doing? The cell phone is a bindu. They're putting their attention on the bindu in reality. You see, and the factor that you're remember we said that our eyes are the creator. People that are very successful have used their physical eyes to look in the center of their imagery. Wherever they are, they've been able to center their eyes, or they're just doing it unconsciously most of the time, that they don't. Are we getting down to 30 minutes? How are we doing on time?
Not far off now. Yeah,
Okay. So
yeah.
how far?
About, I think you can do another 5 minutes.
Okay, this idea of the cell phone bringing it is because there's probably 80% of the world's population is on the cell phone. We have 90% of Americans and there's a billion 1.5 billion Chinese and 1 billion are on the cell phone. And each day there's thousands of more entrants getting into the cell phone usage. You see, it's getting really high rate. I didn't realize it was such a high rate when I looked at it the other day, and well, it's, several weeks ago. That's why I got back into. I used to call it phone plague, but now I call it phone practice, which is very important because it's going to bring the golden age because so much attention is being put on it. In other words, there's less thought. People used to think 72,000 thoughts per day by reflecting inwardly, but now they're looking outwardly at the cell phone, and all this attention is on the cell phone. And the best you can do exoterically is what? Gain a golden age, and your era shifts, right? So it's going to shift the era because that's what people want to have is a higher era, and it will shift it very soon because there's so much power being put on the bindu. See, it's really the bindu of the yantra because I've explained how it is in terms of it's really a threshold that is really eliminated with being it's really a circle. Okay, it's really a circle that we're putting our attention on. And a rectangle is just an oval with the sides pressed in, just like a square is an oval with the sides pressed in. Andrew Wiles did an explanation for Fermat's last theorem. He did the proof in 2000, a 212 page proof of the Fermat's last theorem, which was simply saying, trying to prove that the measurement of an oval. That's what Fermat's last theorem, the big deal on that was just trying to prove the mathematically in an oval. So Andrew Wiles supposedly proved it in a 212-page document, which I disagree with, but they declared it being the proof, right?
So what you're saying is because so many people now are looking at their mobile phones, they're focusing their attention, and it's focusing with the eyes that brings things to us. And because they're focusing with the eyes and thinking less, ha there being less thoughts generally out there, it means that the golden age will materialize.
Yes, because that's what people really want in an exoteric world. That's the best they can do. You're not talking about, you're talking about physical life with your eyes open, physical life, and that's the best you can get. You can't create heaven exoterically. Heaven would be like an inside concept, or supposedly after you die, if you're a theist. If you're atheist, there's nothing exists. But you see what I mean? So that's the best they can offer in a higher era. And that's what will happen because of all this attention that the sun will open up to the horizon and be a dome in the sky. It'll be perpetual sunlight, and not Arthur Clarke's blowing up Jupiter and having Jupiter behind Earth and the sun's in front of it and creating perpetual sunlight. He never mentioned that, too, folks. If you look at this book and you read the book, he never talked about a golden age. They're just assuming that because if you look at the Copernican cosmos, you have the Earth between Jupiter and the sun. If Jupiter exploded, you'd have perpetual sunlight. You'd have no darkness. But it's easier to stop thinking instead of blowing up Jupiter. Wouldn't you agree? And
So,
that's what the cell phone's doing. The cell phone is slowing the thousands of thoughts every day. Yeah, so go ahead.
so what you're saying is deep down people desire to have a heaven on earth, and so that's what they're going to materialize by looking at the cell phone, the golden age.
Correct. I mean, that's all there could be. There isn't anything else. You see? And when you think about it, if you go out and look at all the people on the cell phone, what does that mean? See, it's kind of it's strange. I thought well, that's why I called it phone plague. It's really a plague because everybody's on the phone. So it's going to cause some big shift pretty soon. It can't help but do that. You see, you can just feel it. You can feel it's going to happen because all these people have their attention on this little box, right? Think about how it's ridiculous when you think about it. When there's a big shift out, when the sun is high in the sky, becomes a dome in the sky, people are going to go forget about their cell phones and be in a happy-go-lucky world of everything, full of abundance and what have you. There's going to be a big shift. Yeah, go ahead, kid. Sorry.
So, Grantham, no one needs to be concerned about exposure to electromagnetic frequencies through their phones. Just keep on looking at your phone as much as possible.
Oh, the 5G thing. I went through several years ago. I went through a 5G body thing that I went through. It was kind of like doing the first fidelity ceremony. You don't have to do it anymore. So for about a week, my body was vibrating very strangely, right? And it was like a transition to the 5G thing. So I already did it. So it's in the consciousness. Don't have to worry about it anymore.
Okay, so our body adapts to this kind of thing.
Oh yeah, it's always adaptive. We adapt to everything. We're able to do that. Maxwell Maltz wrote a book years ago called Psycho-Cybernetics, and he was talking about the steermanship within a man. Well, when we get to the brink of something, we steer back into balance. And I really liked that a lot. It was a very positive work. Maltz was a real genius in terms of the cybernetics of our uh, getting into balance.
Mhm.
We go to the brink, and then mankind somehow gets to a point where he survives.
Mhm.
Because we kind of debate. I'm sorry. Go ahead, kid. Sorry.
That would be an interesting topic for another time. Um, but
Absolutely. Oh yeah, because we got to go, right?
yeah, we'll see
Yeah.
you next time. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share.
So wait a minute. Don't go off until I do my moniker or or my finale is bye for now.